Our final speaker of today is Steffen Lüders, who is Head of Stakeholder Relations and Communication at the Novo Nordisk Foundation. So, Steffen, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation to come here today. Let me see how this works. It works. Excellent. I'm going back again. So in my presentation, I will explain a little bit about what we're doing in the Nordisk Foundation, what we're doing in Denmark, how foundations are actually organized in Denmark, and some of the challenges that we have as a foundation. We are met with what I would call a very positive challenge, because we are really expanding our activities at a rapid level. Even though we are an old foundation, we are really having the advantage of having a lot more money to spend in different areas, and that gives also challenges I'm sure some of you are aware of. And we are in a learning phase. We are learning as we are walking or running, and we are employing a lot of more people, and I'm one of them. I'm employed both in the Nordisk Foundation and also in a subsidiary I'll come back to in just in a second, called Novo AS. Actually, I'm not really formally started yet, so I'm probably the newest employee here today. But thank you very much. But I have the privilege of working for the foundation for many years, so I happen to know some of the things that went beyond before I actually start the 1st of June. So let me go into a little of the history behind the Novo Nordisk Foundation, and it goes back many years, actually back to 1922, when insulin was discovered in Canada. One of our famous Danes at that point of time was Krogh, a professor who received the Nobel Prize in 1920 in medicine. He was in a lecture roadshow in America, and at that time these roadshows took quite a long time. And he met with the insulin committee of the University of Toronto and got the rights to produce insulin in the Nordic countries, but on one condition: that all the profits that were made in the production of insulin was given back to research. So that was the original story behind what today is known as Novo Nordisk and a lot of other companies, and also the foundation. Because what happened was, when he came back to Denmark, his wife, by the way, had diabetes, which nobody knew actually at that time except herself and her husband. And together with some other professors and some entrepreneurs, they made a company called the Nordisk Insulin Lab. A few months later, the two gentlemen there, Harald Petersen and Thorvald Petersen, got so tired of these professors that can be quite bothersome. You know, professors can be quite difficult. And they were real good entrepreneurs, so they made out their own company, which was called Novo, and later became Novo Industries. So these two companies were competitors already back from the beginning. And they lived together as competitors in Denmark, producing insulin, doing the same business for 65 years. And they grew and grew, and actually Novo, the two entrepreneurs, actually grew much faster than the other ones. But they still had a tremendous progress in those years. And later, in 1989, the two companies were merged. And it was quite easy to merge them, actually, because they were both owned by foundations. And they both had the same purpose. That was that the profits were reinvested into public research. And so the two competitors joined forces, and what actually happened was that the foundations merged first, and then the company Novo Nordisk came. You see, Novo and Nordisk, that was the history behind. Novo Nordisk today is the most valuable company in the Nordic region, and There was a spin-off also out of Novo Nordisk called Novozymes, which is also listed on the stock exchange. So is Novo Nordisk. But we talked about the history of foundations. Denmark is a country of foundations. I tell you, it's. But what do we call them? Because I've had some discussions with some colleagues here. Are they enterprise foundation, corporate foundations? Are they, what do we call them? If I should translate what we call them in Denmark, it would be something about foundation that owns and manages companies and using the profit either to reinvest in the companies or for philanthropic purposes. And if you look at the Danish market, you will see that a great number of the biggest companies are owned, controlled by foundations. In fact, if you take the 20 most valuable companies listed, more than half of that value is owned by foundations. And if you look at the non-listed, it is more or less the same picture. So Denmark is really a country of foundations. And many of these foundations has the same charter, which is that they want to retain the control, the ownership of the companies in Danish hands, which is probably the only reason why Novo Nordisk is still based, controlled out of Denmark. Otherwise, it would probably been sold many, many years ago. And we wouldn't have all the research facilities of Novo Nordisk in Denmark. We have some other known companies, Carlsberg is owned by a foundation. Maersk, I believe also some of you would know Maersk, is also a foundation-owned company. Well, let me explain a little more about the foundation. Actually, I'm employed in both the Novo Nordisk Foundation and in Novo AS. And Novo AS, I know it's this ridiculous name that is when you also have something called Novo Nordisk and Novo Nordisk Foundation. It's confusing, right? And everybody's also confused in Denmark. But Novo AS is the investment company. It's a subsidiary to the foundation, so actually it's one company. And we sit together in the same spaces, but the guys working in Novo AS are the investment people, the ones, they look like me, right? And then we have the foundation, we have the professors, the researchers, all the doctors and these kind of people, and sometimes they also wear a tie, but that's kind of rare, right? And but they sit together, and the purpose of the investment company is to produce the profits that will be given out by the foundation. And I have to tell you, it's going really well. Novo Nordisk and the companies that is originally owned by the foundation are doing tremendously. But Novo AS in its own investments, because they're investing in other companies, other life science companies, they're doing financial investments, they're very big in the venture market in US, probably maybe one of the biggest ones in the venture market in life science in the US. So they're also making money by themselves. In fact, if we look at 2015, then we have only about 1/3 of our dividends up in Novo AS comes from Novo Nordisk and the other fully owned companies. The rest are made by own investments. And our net profit in Novo AS last year were 2 billion euros. So that gives you an idea of the results of the Novo AS. But if you look at the total amount of assets under Novo AS, that means you also count the value of Novo Nordisk and you count the values of other companies. Then we're talking about, I'm going to convert because we still have Danish crowns, so I'm converting, it's about 50 billion euro value in Novo AS. But we can't really, use this money because most of it is tied up in shares in Novo Nordisk and other companies, and we are not allowed to sell it. So what we really count with is the free capital. The capital we can use either to invest or we can use to give out. And that is approximately 10 billion euros. And that has been growing very fast. So if we go over to the foundation, the money that is giving out, here you can see the progress. You can see that's happening quite a lot in the last years, if you look at the graphs. The blue line, that gives you an idea of the free capital. The light green is grants, and the dark green are payouts. Now, sorry? No. In 2016, we plan to pay out 260 million euros. Last year, it was the half. So we're doubling our payouts this year compared to last year. I think anyone who works in a foundation know what kind of, it's not easy to give out money because you have to make sure they're done in the right way. And there's a lot of work, so we're also staffing up. But some of you might also wonder, how come the light green is so high in some years? Well, it's because the grants are often long-term. That means it's grants we give out that has maybe a 10-year, 15-year perspective. And almost all of this is giving out to, referring to the discussion earlier, to basic research, public basic research. That's the primary sum of this is giving out. So that means we give out money to universities, to professors, to hospitals, and so forth. And if we look at the coming years, it's more than likely that we're going to expand how much we give out. And our focus is Denmark and the Nordic countries, just so you don't pass me up on the canal boat later. So you have to be located in Denmark or in the Nordic countries to be eligible to receive funding. Now, this has meant that the foundation has, because of that we have to give out so much more, has to be able to change the areas of focus and do things in a different way. And that's why I said we are learning as we are walking, and it's a very interesting journey. When we look at Denmark as such, I think quite differently to many other countries, we don't really have any private research institutions. They're all publicly owned. And if you look at the graph, you will see that the private companies' contributions to public research is very limited. That's the obvious reason, is because they're owned by foundations that are giving the money instead. So if you look per capita, I don't think any other country in Europe gives as much per foundation, per capita, to public research as we do. But that's because it's a foundation country. So, so the things about whether it goes to applied research or public research, I think we don't, of course we have that pressure too, but the foundation usually give out to basic research, basic public research, and we certainly still do that in the Novo Nordisk Foundation. So you might say, is there any difference between receiving funding from the public sector or Novo Nordisk? Well, yes and no. No, because it's, when we give out money to hospitals, universities, of course, with a big contract of what they should be applied for and purposes and all that, but it's basically given out, right? So it's the same as it was if it was public. But there's a difference. That is because we are focused, and we will continue to be focused in some certain areas. So that also gives us a certain responsibility. And our focus is biomedicine and biotechnology. So you can understand that in that field we are quite a large player, and we are growing as we speak. Actually, the Novo Nordisk Foundation gives out more to public research in those two areas than all the public body does together today. And that will probably increase as we go forward. So that also gives a certain degree of responsibility about transparency. Because when you have that importance and you are that a player in the market, you have to be completely open and transparent about how decisions are being made, how things are being done. And I think that's an increasing demand, not just for our foundation, but for all foundations in Denmark and probably also in Europe. Secrecy is not a good thing for foundations. For the foundation, I'm sorry, I looked at my clock because I know I'm the only one standing away of you and the canal cruise. So I'm very attentive of not going over time. So it's not because I'm in a hurry, because I could stay here for the most of the evening, but we have to go on out sailing a bit too, right? Now, the foundation has two purposes, basic purposes. One of them is to ensure that the companies that we were originally meant to support, they continue to be world-class players. And that's a primary focus. And it's not something that we can give up. It stands in our charter. That's the one area. The second area is defined also in the original charter, that is to support world-class research within some certain fields. But if you look at the charter on which the foundation has been formed, it is quite broad, which means that we have a lot of possibilities in scaling out. And we're doing that. And I'm going to give you some examples on how we do that. And I promise you probably in 3 or 4 years, we're going to be somewhere else. But let me move. I'm just turning a little slides over here so I can keep the time. Yeah. So one of our areas are education. So we have a number of programs, and some of them are small, some are bigger. We have a Danish Diabetes Academy, where people from all over the world can apply for PhD and come and study. We have Nobel laureate lectures, where we invite some of the world's best scientists to come and lecture, and hopefully inspire some younger, promising researchers to do good. I'm just giving you some examples on what we're doing. Then we are giving out grants, and that has been the basic activity for the foundation, and that's a bottom-up process, which means that it's a public process. We describe what people can apply for, and we receive the applications, and we give out the money, basically. And we hope that it'll do good, right? And we get some reports back on it. And last year, we gave out 50 million euros in this category. We had about 1,300 applications. And it's given out for smaller or bigger. It's full fund scholarships, fellowships, projects, but it's all within the health sciences. So that's the focus area. We do have some little on the side, but that's the primary focus. And we gave out more than the Danish Council for Independent Research last year, just to give you a comparison. But then as an addition to this, as Denmark is quite a small country, and we don't have all the high educated people as we need. So we need to attract more people coming to Denmark. So we have made something called laureate research grants, where we fund some of the top researchers in the world to come to Denmark to study, do the basic research, normally connected to a university, and we ensure the funding for them over a long period. Typically, it's about 5 million euro over 7 years. And in that sense, we have managed to recruit a number of top scientists. And when they come, they bring with them a lot of not only capacity, but they also come with the connections and all the background that they have built, which also creates a very interesting environment for scientists in those areas. I'll give you an example. Matthias Mann of the Max Planck Institute in Munich. He's one of the world's most cited researchers. We gave him 8 million euros to establish a research group at the University of Copenhagen to conduct research on clinical proteomics. I'm sure you're aware of what that is. But just to make sure, it's a large-scale studies of proteins. So he's connected to the Protein Center at the University of Copenhagen, which is also funded by the foundation. But as something quite recent and which has taken a lot of the funding that we have given out, we have gone from what we call the bottom-up, sort of apply for grants, to do strategic cooperations, partnerships. and mostly with the University of Copenhagen and the Danish Technological University. And that is to establish clusters or centers within certain areas that will be absolutely world-class and will drive a basic research that will float into other areas and will also drive innovation in society. And we have helped establish 4 centers, 3 at the University of Copenhagen, 1 in protein, 1 in metabolism, and 1 in stem cells. And at the Danish Technology University, we have established a biotechnology center. If you look at who's employed there, more than half of them are from abroad. So that's international scientists moving to Denmark and working there. And as they progress, the funding that they receive is less and less from our foundation, but from all other sources. All the research that's done there is public. It's not owned by anybody, and all the scientists are free. It's not linked to the Novo Nordisk or other companies owned by the foundation. And let me just see here. Yeah. And one interesting project is the Danish National Biobank. It's a long-term investment because all children born in Denmark since 1982 have had a blood sample taken at birth. These are stored at this blood bank. And they are, how should I say, public accessible in the sense that not everybody can go in and get the information, but in terms of research, you can track every person's history of illness and use of medicines. That's the hope, that we can use this to develop completely new forms of disease treatment. It's very interesting. I'll just see how I'm doing on time. Yes, I'm doing okay. Let me just move on to what we're doing right now. And that shows where we are moving as a foundation. It's something called Steno grants. Actually, we started in Copenhagen, and this is completely new. It's not really, we just broke it, news in Denmark just a few days ago. And what we're doing in Copenhagen is that we're helping the region to establish and build a gigantic diabetes center, which is a full-scale center where you can get all the treatments you need if you have diabetes. Whether you have complications or no complications, how old, it doesn't matter how old you are, in one place. This is a company quite new in terms of disease treatment in Denmark, that you build a center of that size. It starts in Copenhagen, and we're doing that in 4 other regions in the coming years in Denmark. The purpose of it is to raise the patient treatment of people with diabetes at an absolutely world-class level. So what we do is that we complement what the basic treatment they get from the public service sector, and then we add on all the other things to it, including also basic research and as well as education. This is a donation that totals 1 billion euro from the foundation over the next 10 years. And I think in terms of partnership, this is quite new. It's not owned by the foundation. Basically, we give it to the state, but it has a specific purpose with it. And it involves a lot of cooperation with the universities, hospitals that are publicly owned. As part of this, we also included a private hospital that has been driven by the Novo Nordisk Foundation called Steno Hospital, which was a leading hospital, which goes from privately owned to publicly owned. Normally this goes the other way, right? But we moved this back to the public sector because we could not see that it was a core activity of either the foundation or Novo Nordisk to drive a hospital, to run a hospital. So that went back to the public sector, just to show that things can also go the other way. This is an example of some of the activities that we have been going into in terms of what we give out. And there has been a few words about effects, and time doesn't allow me to go into this, but we believe it's important to know more about the effects of public research. research actually in total, not only public, but research in general. What works, what doesn't work. We don't know enough about it. And that's why we have established a center at the foundation that only works doing research in this. And we are funding public research into the effect of public research. It sounds maybe ridiculous, but we actually expect a lot of it in the coming years, because as a society, it's important to have an idea of what works when you fund research. Of course, you can hope that you get something out of it, but wouldn't it be nice to know a little more about what works and what doesn't? And we hope we'll get some more data about this in the coming years. We did do one research which was published a few weeks ago, which showed the direct consequence on the country's GDP and public research, made out of the same economic models as used by the Ministry of Finance in Denmark. We have two models, one called Adam, one called Dream. And these models were used to show what happens to the GDP and the key economic factors of a country when you invest more or less in research. And big surprise. It has a both short-term and middle-term positive effect on a country's economic factors when you raise investment in public research. And surprisingly, it has the same negative effect. So, I'm not sure politicians that needs to cut public spending and public research were too happy about that. But we think that the research data was quite solid. We're happy to share that information with you, and it's in English on our website. You can download it. I think that's my time for now. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you, Steffen, for a wonderfully informative presentation, not just about Novo Nordisk, but also about the Danish model of foundations. I have one question from me, and then maybe a couple from the audience before we head off for the canals. To what extent is the Danish model generalizable, potentially as a model for elsewhere in Europe?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I might actually have succeeded making it sound more positive than it was. The negative side, I have to answer the question.
And you in communications and all that.
But the negative side is that we haven't had any substantial foundations created in Denmark since 1989. And the reason is tax regulation. So the government, in their brilliance, they made changes in the regulation, making it very difficult for entrepreneurs who had made a fortune to donate their money, to give their money to a foundation that will actually bring out the good work. Imagine that. And so in the wisdom, we have tried to sort of redo that in terms of legislation, but that's very difficult. I don't know if you've tried to change tax laws the wrong directions. It's kind of a work. And so what we're worried about is that we don't have so many new foundations being built, because it's simply almost impossible. And so answering your question, almost all of the foundations were built on some people having made success with their dream work and wanted to carry this on, not giving it to their children, not having the money spent on stupid things, but let the work carry on.
But what about this subsidiary approach, I guess, at least, of trying to create these special clusters or centers of excellence? Is that something where you think that could be something that would have application?
Yes, and that is, on the clusters things, that's the basic strategy behind what the foundation wants to invest in. Because our idea is that if we spread out our investments, also in research, too broad, then we don't achieve anything being a small country and in a global competition. So we have to focus, but not too hard either. And remember, we fund basic research. So, but it still has to be focused.
Did anyone have a question? Oh, gentleman in the middle and gentleman at the back.
I'm graduated on privacy, and I have a question for you about the biobank. can you ensure that no personal data can be linked from the biobank, the blood data about health is special data, it's a very strict law regime on that, to any individual person without any, that it is, you know, that it is verified by law. I mean, but, you know.
I understand your question. There is a general fear, not only in Denmark, but I think most of the world, that you can actually reveal personal information about people. Now, personally, I cannot assure you because it's not under my control. The biobank is owned by the public government, and so it's under all the restrictions and rules that is under state law. I think they have pretty good check on security. Yeah. So yeah.
And the gentleman at the back there. Do say who you are.
My name is Sotiris Pavleas, Ministry of Education and Research in Greece. So we are in the process of building a foundation for research and innovation nowadays, and supported by the EIB funding. And so my question has a more of a functional type character. I mean, does your foundation has its own evaluation and monitoring mechanisms of the research proposals that it's accepting, or because we're trying to figure it out now,
yes,
and we need kind of some help, or you hand out the funding to universities or other public research organizations, and you monitor the approved use of the funding?
Yes, I think it's a very good question, and I didn't mention anything about that in my presentation. All the funds that we are giving out are being evaluated and approved by external authorities. That means we have, for the grants, we have actually 11 different committees of people not being dependent that are evaluating and deciding who gets the grants. On the research, there's a number of approvals, but what we want to make sure is that because of the amount of money, because of the importance, that you cannot ask questions about the neutrality and the decision making. Of course, you can always ask questions anyway, but we have made it with committees and we made systems so there's always another authority, opinion, expert that is behind the funding that we give.